All right. Stream should be back live. That means we have a fresh VOD. QXC will be on in 4 minutes. That gives us time for one song. So I'm going to play one of my favorites. If I can find it. Bam. Rock and roll. Let's get this show on the road. All right, I'm Mr. Bitter. This is 12 Weeks with the Pros. We're going to be talking with QXC today about TvZ. Before we get started, please, everybody, go check out our relaunch of the website, www.evolutioncomplete.com. That was recently redone so that you guys can find all of our VODs in the video library there, and you can see all sorts of other cool stuff. We'll be adding a lot to that here in the near future, so please check out the site. Let's get QXC on the call. Doot, 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 doot.
Hey,
QXC!
how's it going, man?
Going really well. How are you, man?
Pretty good. I'm glad that tournament finally ended.
Dude, what's been going on today? Little, I guess, less than savory actions against you, huh?
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of my fault. I don't think what they did was totally justified, but when I was streaming earlier, we were going into other people's streams and just like spamming and shit for like 5 minutes and then randomly leaving. And someone was not happy about that and
Okay.
told me so by attacking my internet for like 4 hours.
That's awesome. Uh, well, shit happens.
Yeah,
All right, man. Well, you just got done running through the Go 4 SC2 Cup. How was that?
it was pretty good. I didn't play too many good people, but I was really happy to meet up with Adel Scott and 2-0 him.
Nice, 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 nice. And you had actually a Zerg in the finals,
Yeah,
which looked a little bit one-sided, to be honest.
my 2 racks is pretty good.
Yeah, obviously, and we're going to talk a lot about that today. Our focus, obviously, going to be TvZ. I've got my buddy Jay Echo here to play with us. He's a Grandmaster Zerg player. Certainly, probably, well, no, nothing against him, but he's probably not quite at QXC level. But if you slack off or you make mistakes, he can certainly take games off you. So as soon as we get started, we'll be playing against him. But before we do that, I wanted to try and kind of pick your brain a little bit and get your sort of TvZ philosophy, because there's a lot of different ways to play it. Some guys like to sit back and macro, some guys like to play hyper aggressive, and I think you sort of fall into that latter category of being a more aggressive harassment based player. Do you agree with that statement? And how would you kind of summarize your Terran versus Zerg philosophy?
I mean, yeah, that's what it is. It's all about just applying pressure. For me, the hardest part about TvZ is knowing how much pressure you can apply. It's really You see this a lot with lower level players. They'll get to a point in the game where they just don't know what to do,
Yeah.
and so they'll just decide to make a bad decision. They'll be like, "Well, I don't know how to play anymore, so I'm just going to attack him."
Okay.
And when you're trying to be aggressive against Zerg, that's a really tempting way to play it. But what's really important is to not do things like that. Like, instead of just attacking the Zerg, what I've been doing more is you set up a position on the map and you start building bunkers and turrets. And so it's not as much like I'm just going to attack the Zerg until he says GG. It's like setting up very strong offensive positions on the map and then working the game from there.
Yeah, maybe I'm going to go out on a limb and try to describe what I saw in your play as I was watching the Go for SC2 Cup. But I would almost call it turtling aggressively. Because you almost push up to a position on the map and say, okay, I'm going to hold this, and then you kind of secure it, and then you do it again. And it just kind of happened all the way across the map. I'm thinking very specifically about the Zelnaga Caverns game, where you just basically split the map, and then you took just past half map, and then it just sort of snowballed from there.
Yeah, and that's kind of the general game plan, and then from there, using drops. Like, usually Zerg's going mutas in the mid game, and so if you're going to drop, you try and drop, like, if you see the mutas somewhere out on the map, you drop on the other side of the map.
Okay.
And then usually you can get a decent amount of damage. But the main things, there's really two main things that you're going to be using drops for in TvZ past the opening stages of the game. You're either going to be trying to snipe tech, or you're going to be trying to deny expansions.
Okay. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No. Please continue.
So, on a map like Tal'Darim, which is just gigantic between the north and south ends, doing something like taking 2 medevacs, loading them up with units, and then just having them fly around those bottom bases, really good way to apply pressure, and pretty tough for Zerg in general to see something like that. Obviously, if they're spreading over, like, one of the things that you really need to do as Zerg is spread your overlords out so you can see stuff like that coming. But even then, like, Zerg mobile anti-air is not so great. Like, you need a decent amount of mutas because highly upgraded Marines are going to be able to defend those medevacs without too much trouble.
Right.
Hydralisks don't count. Infestors don't count. They're too slow. You have a really hard time actually intercepting the drops with units like that.
Now, you mentioned infestors, and I think that's a point worth spending some time on, maybe just a little. I've heard a lot of Terran crying about infestors recently. It started to kind of fall off a little bit as people are sort of adjusting to the metagame. But there were some folks shouting OP for a little while. How do you feel about the new infestor in this matchup, and how do you feel about the sort of infestor styles that are starting to almost replace mutas altogether?
The infestor is pretty interesting now. It's definitely more usable. It's not like it's not more interesting because they made the unit more interesting. It's a more interesting unit because it's actually worth building in more situations than just with Brood Lords or Ultralists. Like as a mid-game unit comp, it's pretty good in general, and it's really up to the Terran player to micro and make sure they're just not clumping their units too much and sniping off the infestors where they can. The main thing that infestors have trouble with is breaking those kind of defenses, like you saw in the Zelnaga Caverns game. 7 infestors is not going to help you break 10 siege tanks behind bunkers and turrets.
Correct. Yes. They're not really good at breaking a position. That's kind of what Brood Lords are for in the Zerg army. And you know, I guess Terran is pretty well equipped to deal with Brood Lords in a lot of situations. Vikings are pretty good at that. Marines are pretty good at that, or they can be. But really, I think the important thing is when it gets to that stage in the game, that just comes down to, you know, the two players are working against each other. That's where you actually play the game. But anyways, so what I would like to do here, QXC, is get some games in. Have you play against J Echo while I sort of pick your brain, and we'll talk through them together. And we'll probably play for an hour, maybe an hour and a half, just depending on how long these games are. If we get like a million short games, I would hate to, you know, subject you to that for too terribly long. And then we'll jump in to some questions from our audience, and then we'll just cut out of here, man. So we'll try to get this done within the next hour and a half, because I know you're already we've already been set back a little bit longer than we had planned. But if you're ready, let's get this show on the road.
Yeah, let's do it. Do you have any specific builds or openings that you want me to do?
What I would really like is just to see your go-to play, and I'll ask you about it, you know, and you mix it up however you would. You know, pretend this is a best of however many games we play.
All right.
And we'll talk about the decisions you make, and I'll ask you questions and be like, well, is this really the best idea? And if at any point I'm a little bit distracting, just tell me to shut up, and we'll come back to it after you've dealt with whatever situation has called for your increased focus.
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah, I laughed when you said it was pretend it's a best of X, because most of the time when you play like a best of 3 or a best of 5, like each game you're like, all right, I'll do something different because I don't want my opponent to just be able to blind counter what I'm doing.
Right. I
played like 15 TvZs today, and every single one I opened 2 racks and won.
That's actually interesting, and that's something I've been talking about with some of my Terran practice partners. Is 2 racks is just a strong build. It's safe. I don't think. I mean, please correct me here. I don't think Terran ever comes out behind after a 2 racks. How do you feel about the build just in general?
It's a really strong and really flexible build. Terran can definitely come out behind if they don't micro appropriately. But it's pretty like I don't do the 12-14 racks. I think it's too slow.
So you do 11-11?
It's 11-12.
Okay. Which is pretty aggressive.
Yeah, that's been doing me really good. The main thing that's really important about the 2 racks is you're trying to get the 3 Marines to your opponent's base as soon as possible. 1 Marine, you're just kind of pressuring. 2 Marines, you're doing a little bit of poking. But until you get 3 Marines, you can't really engage effectively.
Right. Because they'll just pull 8 drones and you got to run. But let me. This is funny that you mentioned this 2 racks, this 11-12 2 racks, because I was discussing this with somebody just yesterday, and the conclusion that I keep coming to, and it could just be because I'm bad, is that this really effectively shuts down a hatch first. How do you feel about this build specifically against the Zerg going hatch first?
I mean, there's a reason that I'm not going to be modest here. I don't have enough energy to try and be modest in any way. There's a reason I didn't lose any TvZs this entire day doing this build. Like, it's good. And if you have good micro, it's better.
And I hear QXC's micro is okay?
I think so.
Oh, man. One of my favorite things about you that I kind of realized in Dallas is you just kind of call it like you see it.
Yeah, man. I don't have time to